Welcome to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. This is the Manchester Arena bombing on trial series. On the 22nd of May, 2017, Salman Abedi detonated a bomb in the foyer of the Manchester Arena at the end of an Ariana Grande concert, killing 22 people and injuring hundreds more. A conspiracy theory claiming that this bombing was hoaxed and everyone involved was a crisis actor soon became a dominant narrative in the conspirasphere. One of the main proponents of this theory is Richard D. Hall. Over the course of this series, we will be examining the claims made by Richard D. Hall, as told in his book and documentary, Night of the Bang. Please be aware, this series will be examining a deadly bombing, and we will be discussing details of death and injury. Listener discretion is advised. This is part 8.
So we're on the home stretch. The injured, Ruth Morel, shouldn't be able to walk because she got a bolt through her leg. We've already said that. That's adrenaline.
Yeah.
Richard said that Lisa Roussos turned up with no visible injuries at her daughter's funeral. Well, I mean, she's got a sling and her hand's in a cast, but yeah, there's no blood dripping down her, but like, Jesus Christ. Like,
yeah, what do you expect?
Yeah. And again, they were the ones that were forced to sell their chip shop because they couldn't afford to live there. Adam Lawler, he says that basically he thinks that he was glassed, but there's a picture of them earlier that day, him and Olivia, in Manchester, and with no scars on his face. Robbie Potter, his finger was supposedly hanging off, and then 12 weeks later, he's using his healed hand. I initially thought that was a bit strange, so I looked it up. Do you know the recovery for a complete finger amputation is 2 to 4 weeks?
Yeah.
No, I thought that as well. I thought surely it must take much longer than that. So by 12 weeks, he's well in the clear. And it wasn't completely severed anyway. It was dangling by skin and tendons, but it wasn't completely cut off.
Well, that's one nice thing that's happened tonight.
Well, yeah.
Listeners, you can enjoy that.
Hannah Moan, who he says that potentially cut it off, cutting the hedges, and he doesn't understand why there's this square scab on her finger. And it's like, you can see her running down the thing with holding a hand like this. And then her sister did a film called In Bloom that shows her going through the recovery period in hospital. And you can see the freshly stitched finger that's been amputated. And then the square that's on the other side, on the finger, on her index finger, it's the skin graft that's been taken off to put over the wound on the other one. She explains this in the thing. Now, furthermore, this is where the whole thing falls down, because what he's suggesting is, she lost that finger beforehand. She's always had a finger missing. Now, to be fair, I did a bit of creepy stalking, went on her Facebook and stuff, and every single picture of her hand is just out of view. So I couldn't find that. However, it suddenly struck me. It's like she's at school. You remember being at school. You're at school with 1,000 other kids.
Uh-huh.
Are you seriously telling me that nobody would have got on social media and gone, fuck off, she's lost her finger years ago?
Yeah.
You cannot hide that from school kids. Can you remember school? Everybody knew who you'd got off with. Everybody knew, when you'd been shouted at by your teachers. Everyone knew when you'd been grounded by your parents. You cannot hide shit like that from school. Lisa Bridget, he says that basically she's just folded her middle finger under, and then she just uses it.
Oh, fuck
You can't
off.
do that. Try it. Seriously.
You
Try
prick.
and use your hand with your middle finger.
It just doesn't work.
Exactly.
You can't.
Where she's accusing, Amelia Senior, 12 years old, who basically, she says, we ended up leaving a bit early because everyone had gone off the stage because it was just like the ending bit. That's just how teenagers talk. They're inarticulate. They've got hormones rushing around them. That's just, again, it's just ridiculous. Evie Mills, 14, who was there with her friend Millie Mitchell. And Millie Mitchell was in a wheelchair. And if you remember, Richard says that basically she was lying on a stretcher. She's got a wrist was broken and she's using her phone and stuff like that. And she sat against the wall, and Richard thinks they're fake. He's not told you about the third picture. The third picture that shows her in the ambulance bleeding from a clear wound in her head with a swollen wrist. So he's focused on the first two, but he's not talked about the picture of in the back of the ambulance where you can actually see her wounds. Now, why was she able to cope like that and text on her phone? Probably adrenaline. I had a friend, I've told this story before, jumped off the top steps at Rock City, broke both his ankles, walked home 4 miles on them, didn't realise they were broken until he woke up the next day. Like, it happens. Now, if you remember, Richard said it was a bit strange that the girls don't mention each other when they're in their interviews or in the interviews that he's seen, and that he suspects that they never met each other before the scripted event. If he'd just gone on their Facebook and he'd seen loads and loads of pictures of them together in 2016, they're clearly friends. They've clearly been friends for a long, long time. Richard just hasn't bothered to do his due diligence. Martin and Eve Hibbert, we've talked about that basically. Like, he got it wrong about the, he was stood with Eric Cantona, the scars in the wrong place for a herniated disc, and the X-ray. He's misunderstood what the X-ray looks like. So we won't even bother with Martin. Amy Barlow, she was the one that was filmed running down the steps, and then as soon as she gets outside, she starts squealing and bleeding through her legs, and they say that it's fate. And they say, why is this? How has that happened? So I had a look, and apparently it's adrenaline. Adrenaline is what's called a vasoconstrictor, i.e. it stops the blood from flowing. Does this make sense? When you go to fight or flight, you try not to die. Yeah. So she's run off, and the second she's got out, hit the cold air, stopped, taken stock of the situation, and the adrenaline's worn out, then she started bleeding. That's it. It's as simple as that, basically. Then there's Lisa Bridget, who's the person that he went and filmed secretly at her place of work, which is, again, it's just ridiculous. Like, and the most silly thing about that is Genevieve Lewis saying, well, she's clearly lying because she hasn't got a scar on her face. She has got a scar on her face. It's here. It's just here. It looks a bit like a dimple because of luckily where it went. But yeah, she has got a scar on her face.
And these fuckers are judging her.
It's silly, isn't it? So again, we can see that with all the dead and all that, it's ridiculous. So we're on to finally the interview he did with the Truth magazine. And he says, it's a public inquiry. Why aren't they showing videos? It's dead children, Richard. It makes sense not to watch it over and over and over. He says, why aren't they showing things in the inquiry? And he says, well, because the inquiry isn't there to establish if these people died. Everybody's on board with that. Everyone thinks they died. It's there to let the surviving witnesses have a picture of their loved one's final moments. And I'll say this again. You know who doesn't like the inquiry and who does think that there's gaps in it? Martin Hibbert, the very person that's actually suing Richard. He thinks that MI5 is hiding something, and we'll come on to why that is in a bit. But yeah, so what else? He says that there's no other evidence. And he says, well, yeah, there is though, isn't there? Like the detail, the level of detail, there is actually some still photos. There is some CCTV footage. There's enough of a picture to paint that this person was definitely there and this person was definitely there. The inquiry is so incredibly detailed that the stories intertwine. In order to make that up would take more effort than actually just bombing the place, basically. And again, the whole point is that Richard's initial reason for thinking it's fake is wrong. His starting point with the EXIF data, he's mistaken on that. I could understand why he thought that was really, really important and really actually showed something that it didn't. But he's wrong. He's just wrong. Then when he starts talking about statement analysis, well, statement analysis is really just flawed. And he says that basically he thinks that this was a massive operation with various public sector agencies. So which public sector agencies? You've shown absolutely zero evidence for this. You haven't shown what the motive is. You haven't shown how those involved were vetted. Now, he does talk about the perpetrator, and he's right. There were certain connections to MI6, but as we've shown, the grey Audi was still in circulation. And there's footage of him arriving on the tram. And he was in Libya up till 4 days beforehand. So that's completely wrong.
And the CCTV matches the witness description of what he's looked like with his glasses, with his hat, with the hoodie, the jacket and the bag.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it looks like minutes after getting off the train.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no evidence that Salman Abedi left the foyer despite Richard's speculation. And there's actually no evidence that any of this recruitment took place. Going to hospitals, going to universities, trying to get people to give up their lives. There's no evidence to actually back this up. Other than Richard's opinion, there's no evidence to show that this was fate. There's no evidence of a rehearsal. There's no proof that somebody's abroad. There's nothing. He then goes on to compare the blast scene to the Omaha bombing and says that there's no one showing a photo showing an open flesh wound with someone's bone sticking out. And he's implying that that was shown in the Omaha bombing. So I went back and had a look, and he's not strictly telling the truth there. There is a picture from the Omaha bombing that exists of somebody with their leg blown off and a bone sticking out of it. Okay. But it isn't in any of the newspapers. This is in a science paper that's talking about how to deal with burns and flesh wounds that occurred at the Omaha bombing. But there's no photos that actually show gore in the newspapers that I could find. And also, it's completely bollocks. Comparing the Omaha bombing or the London Nail bombing to the Manchester bombing, you've got completely different scenarios, completely different areas, and completely different types of explosive and completely different accounts. Omaha was a car bomb with 230 kilograms of fertilizer. Right? Soho had a 1,500 100mm nails. It was 20 kilograms. Whereas supposedly Manchester was 30 kilograms of nuts and bolts with TATP. And he then goes on to say that we've not seen any photos of the dead or wounded. It's like, well, we've clearly shown that there are some. It's just that he thinks it's their fate. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say that there are none. He says, why were people not showing pictures and why have pictures not emerged on the internet? It's like, these are dead children. If I phoned up the Sun and says, I've got a picture of some dead children, you want to publish it? They go, no. And if I put that on my Facebook, you'd probably be arrested for indecent imagery. When he says that people will say that the lack of evidence doesn't mean that it didn't happen the way that they say, but once you look at other things such as first-hand witness statement, the official narrative falls apart, that's massively ironic because there's literally no evidence that he provides for his claims other than people's opinions, essentially. He says, well, remember when they showed PC Rathband all shot up, like on the front of the thing? It's like, they didn't show open wounds. They showed him as an adult with his healed wounds, not children with bits of things missing. Who wants to see dead children? And when he says, well, they could have just given an 18 or, put it out in limited quantities or something like, well, technically that's what they did. They showed it to a very limited number of people. If you'd have shown it with an 18, sooner or later, it's going to get on the internet somewhere. Someone's going to see it. So probably best to just leave it alone, to be honest. When he starts going on about how basically he's having his free speech stifled and he's being persecuted for his opinion, it's like, it's not just your opinion though, is it? You published a book and a film accusing people of killing their own children or lying about their children being dead, faking the deaths of other children, lying about life-changing injuries and being general frauds.
Over 450 pages. Maybe 300-word bullshit, but still 150 pages of nonsense.
Further to that, he doxed people. He stalked them by showing their houses on camera. He tacitly led to other people doing similar things, even though he didn't encourage that. And the fact that he removed that bit where he set up the hidden camera from his film shows that he knows that it's wrong. If it's just an opinion, why is that your defense? It's not an opinion, is it? That's going to be his defense in the upcoming court case that it didn't happen. I was right. So it's not just an opinion. You genuinely think that's the case. It's not about bankrupting you. It's about Martin trying to stop people pestering his daughter, to be quite honest. If they wanted to destroy Richard, we've said this before, there's loads of other things that they could quite happily do that would be far, far worse for him. So is there anything that comes out of this that is actually worth looking at from a sort of conspiratorial angle? And it turns out that yes, there is. Salman Abedi and the intelligence agencies. Now, what happened was when civil war broke out in Libya in 2011, dozens of British Libyans returned to their homeland to fight against Muammar Gaddafi. And the UK military worked with Islamist militants during the 2011 war to overthrow Gaddafi, and many of them came from Manchester, including the Abedi family. Salman Abedi, who was 16 at the time, and his younger brother Hashim were removed from their school in Didsbury and taken by their father Ramadan Abedi to Libya to help fight against Gaddafi. This is when he was a teenager. Salman's father Ramadan was a member of the LIFG, which is the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, a militia with links to Al-Qaeda. Journalists like Peter Oborne and members of the LIFG have all claimed that MI5 and MI6 encouraged, financed, supported, and trained this group over a period of time. In fact, in 1995, MI6 intelligence officer, codenamed Tunworth, was a member of the LIFG and arranged for a payment to the group of £100,000 to assassinate Gaddafi. This was unsuccessful, and basically what happened was they killed the wrong person. They bombed the wrong car, and civilians ended up getting killed in the gunfight that happened. But basically what happened was then the LIFG were taken to either London or Manchester, and this included Ramadan Abedi, Salman Abedi, and his brothers. There's another LIFG member who came to Manchester whose name was Anas al-Libi, and he's often described as Al-Qaeda's computer expert. And he was directly involved in the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. He was given political asylum in the UK in 1999, where he was interviewed by UK police but not charged. In 2000, his house was raided and a 180-page Al-Qaeda manual was found, but he somehow miraculously escaped. He was captured by the USA in 2013 in Libya, and he died in hospital in 2015, just prior to his trial starting. But during the time of the Manchester bombing in 2017, a group of Gaddafi dissidents who were members of the outlawed LIFG lived within close proximity of the Abedi family in Whalley Range. Among them was Albert al-Basset Azouz, who's a father of four from Manchester, who left Britain to run a terrorist network in Libya overseen by Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's successor as leader of Al-Qaeda. Azouz is an expert bomb maker and was accused of running an Al-Qaeda network in Libya. Ramadan Abedi fled to Libya just before the bombing in Manchester happened, as did his younger brother Hashim. Ramadan and Salman's older brother Ismail had previously been stopped coming back from Libya into the UK in both 2011 and 2015, and on both occasions, terrorist material was found on them, including terror manuals, ISIS downloads, jihadi chants, encouraging the killing of infidels, martyr poems, martyrdom videos by suicide bombers, and jihadi recruitment videos. So this was found on their laptops and phones on numerous occasions. But for some reason, MI5 and MI6 just ignored this. 2 months prior to the stop, security services had viewed Ismail's Facebook account and determined he was problematic, containing numerous pictures of men in camouflage with military-grade weaponry. Ismail Abedi, who's the older brother of Salman, appears holding pistols, an RPG, assault rifles, machine guns, and he's sitting on an anti-aircraft gun, and he's pictured with ISIS logos and flags. Pictures also show Salman, taken in 2011, holding a 50 cal machine gun in front of ISIS flags. But despite this, the family was allowed to travel to and from Libya several times with no problems, only being stopped once. And when they did get stopped, they found terrorist material on their devices. Strange. Basically, after they came home from the civil war, Salman got involved in gang culture and he drank and did drugs. He was pretty badly behaved at college. And even when he was at college, 2 people called anti-terrorism hotlines on him. About 18 months before the bombing, suddenly Salman had a massive religious awakening and became incredibly devout Muslim. However, MI5 first noticed Salman in 2010 due to his links to other persons of interest. So in 2017, he'd been on the radar for nearly a decade. And for some reason, they're not doing anything. Now, strangely, MI5 actually lied and says, we never heard of him till 2014. But that's just not true. In 2014, he was placed under investigation due to using certain mosques, and the investigation shows that he'd been a person of interest for several years already. Just after this, in 2014, Salman and his brother Hashim travel again to Libya, and for some reason, MI5 suddenly close their investigation and say that basically he's not involved with extremists, despite the fact that he's literally gone to an extremist terrorist training camp in Libya at the time. Now, what happened was, in Libya, they got into some sort of bother and they ended up having to be rescued by the Royal Navy. And Salman and his brother were brought back to the UK on the naval ship, the HMS Enterprise. In early 2015, Salman's friend Abdel Rauf Abdallah is charged with terrorism and is sent to Belmarsh prison. His phone is confiscated and it contains several messages from Salman saying that he wants to become a Shaheed, which is a martyr or a suicide bomber. So again, this picture is starting to build up. After the bombing in 2017, Abdallah reportedly told a prison guard that he knew Salman was planning something, although he never used this as a sort of way to sort of get his sentence shortened. Later, he claimed total shock and that Salman was not a likely suicide bomber, so it could be that guard's lying, but we just don't know. In October 2015, MI5 reopened their file on Salman, but strangely closed it on the very same day. He's described as a two-tier person of interest. Two-tier person of interest is not a normal designation. And the only explanation that comes from a gentleman called Tom Secker, who's got a website called Clandestine or Spy Time, who's very, very knowledgeable about this sort of thing, is that a two-tier person of interest probably means that he's a double agent. Now, in May 2016, Salman travels to Libya again, and he spends the summer again at a known ISIS training camp. In January 2017, he returns to the UK and again visits Abdallah in Belmarsh prison. Now, here we go. In April 2017, the Abedi family take a one-way ticket to Libya. So in April 2017, he couldn't have been out there filming all this stuff on the trams and stuff because he was in Libya. Okay? They also decide that this doesn't warrant investigation. And now in the months prior to the Manchester bombing, police were told on 2 occasions that Salman was planning something, but it was dismissed as non-terrorist criminality. Now, in hindsight, MI5 and MI6 say, actually, this info was highly relevant to the planned incident. And if they'd have followed it up, it might have prevented it. There's an MI5 meeting on Salman that is scheduled for the 31st of May. But on the 22nd of May, 4 days after returning from Libya, he carries out the attack. So this is a guy that's known for several years as being associated with having terrorist material, being trained in terrorist organizations. He's gone on a one-way ticket to Libya. He's on MI6's radar and MI5's radar. 4 days before the bombing, he comes back. And is he stopped by the people at the airport? No, he's let go. He's let absolutely go. Now, Tom Secker of Spy Culture and Clandestine also makes some interesting questions. Why would they do a suicide bomber at such a soft target? There's no need to be a suicide bomber. They could have just thrown a bomb in through the front door. If he is a suicide bomber, why did he not leave a suicide note or a martyr video? Because that's kind of important for the sort of ceremonial aspect of it. He also questions why TATP produced such a loud bang and suggests that potentially it could be that it was another explosive that was used. And he's the person that basically says that he's probably an asset of MI5, which is why he's a two-tiered person of interest. Because apparently Salman's poorly educated, but apparently he's made this incredibly complicated bomb. And there's no indication that he actually knows how to do this. Him and the person that was arrested with him, I think it was his older brother, for the bomb factory that they did, mysteriously left loads and loads of evidence flying around, almost as if they were leaving evidence that they wanted to get caught. So he points out that they bought all the peroxide, all the peroxide that they were going to use with his credit card off Amazon. You could have gone into any shop, right? Okay. And bought it with cash. They also bought sulfuric acid off Amazon with his credit card.
Well, it's just so easy,
Well, yeah, that is true. The convenience. They also don't know where they got hold of the acetone. The acetone is a really vital ingredient. It's quite difficult, but they don't actually know where they... Well, no, apparently not.
Well, how did they get it within 1 day? I mean, this is insane. I have
eBay.
no idea. Oh, eBay. Oh, well, eBay is a competitor.
Also, all the nuts and bolts that he bought for it, he bought them all from the same branch of Screwfix using his credit card. He went about 3 or 4 times.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So he's on CCTV buying it.
I was going to say Screwfix.
Right, but here's the strange thing, right? Okay, when they'd made this bomb, right, they were getting a bit paranoid about the bomb being there. So apparently what happened was they got all the explosive together and Salman Abedi put it in a cardboard box. He then phoned a taxi from his own contract phone, right? And got this taxi to take him many, many miles south to a place called Rusholme. When he got to Rusholme, he stopped there for a bit and then said to the taxi driver, keep driving me further south. And so they're driving around with this highly unstable explosive in the back seat of this car. He then gets a call from his older brother, and they go back past his house, north, and they get dropped off at a housing estate, a block of flats called Whitworth Park. And there They get out of the taxi, pay the taxi driver, and they load the explosives into a Nissan Micra, and then they leave it in the Nissan Micra, and then they both fuck off to Libya for several months.
Whoa.
It doesn't make a huge amount of sense, does it? Now, this is the thing. There are questions that are legitimate. As I say, even Martin Hibbert has asked questions about it. What it looks like is that MI5 are trying to hide some connection to him. And so they're sort of only releasing the information that people need to know. I mean, Tom Secker goes even further. I don't necessarily agree with this, but he points out that there was a time that it was reported in the English press that certain top military brass, unnamed, had told people that if Jeremy Corbyn got elected as Prime Minister, they would enact a military coup on the government of the UK. And this was reported in lots of newspapers. It never said who it was. Now, the upshot of the bombing at Manchester was that political campaigning was cancelled, which put a right stopper on Corbyn's campaign. Now, it's pure speculation, but Tom Secker speculates that maybe they decided to do a false flag operation and blow up some people because that was an easier option than a coup later. Do I believe that? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. That's a more plausible conspiracy than Richard's. Is it definitely true? No idea. Absolutely no idea. But Richard's avoided that. So let's be fair. So, okay, I think he's wrong. I think he's totally wrong. I think the theory's wrong. I think the way he went about it was totally wrong. The only sympathy that I have with this is that if I was in Richard's shoes and I believed the EXIF data and I believed that Genevieve Lewis was the professional that she claimed to be, then I could understand why he felt that there was a strong case. But let's look at all the reasons that Richard's theory is wrong. One, the EXIF data, it isn't EXIF data, it's IPTC data showing when AP registered the data in New York at 7 in the evening. Because it's a 12-hour clock, that's why it says 7:11. It's 7:11 p.m. New York, not 7:11 a.m. Manchester. And other versions, basically the ones that are 3 and 4 in the morning, that's different computers in different time zones, be registering it in other different time zones. So there's nothing suspicious there, basically. 2, the foyer window doesn't actually show light coming in. It's the reflection of the large white light on the opposite wall. 3, statement analysis is not reliable. It has never been shown to work. Even if it does, Genevieve Lewis made several errors by not having a baseline, by having prior knowledge of the theory, by believing the morning theory, so having confirmation bias, and ignoring regional accents and expressions. 4, the grey Audi was registered to the same person from 2015 to 2023. Why would it still be part of a secret plot and still be on the road? There's absolutely zero evidence showing Salman Abedi arrived in the car or left in the car, and there is actually CCTV footage of him arriving at Manchester Arena by the tram. 5, the inquiry, whilst not showing CCTV footage, is incredibly detailed and lists dozens of interactions, seemingly corroborated by other statements and pictures taken at the scene. It would be incredibly complex to create. Richard shows no contradictions or gaps in logic regarding the inquiry's timeline or basic findings. There is footage and pictures of the dead and wounded, but he simply thinks that these are not real. 6, TATP can actually make heat and light, particularly if mixed with other components. Even with pure TATP, there has been heat and light observed by some scientists. 7, Richard provides absolutely no evidence to back up speculations such as Safi Roussos being killed by neglectful parents or funerals being fake. He provides zero evidence to show that anybody is abroad or that anybody had injuries prior to the actual event. 8, his theory about Martin Hibbert is implausible. He is seen standing with Eric Cantona in February 2017, so that's not enough time for him to have catastrophic back surgery, get it together, be recruited to pretend it happened in May, and how would he conceal this injury and the fact that he was going from back surgery to all the people that he knows in his life? 9, Richard bases his theory on the presumption that crisis actors have been proven to be used in false flag operations, citing the Boston bombing. It has never been proven that the Boston bombing was either a false flag or used crisis actors. That is pure speculation. 10, the Bickerstaff evidence is weak and open to interpretation. The actions of Jordan Kennedy and the large crowd in the corridor indicate that the concert is over, contrary to Richard's beliefs. 11, he's wrong about injuries. He misidentifies a skin graft. He doesn't understand the recovery time for severed fingers. He misunderstands Martin Hibbert's X-ray. 12. He's wrong about the city room's suitability. It's a grey area owned by no one with access from several businesses and the general public. It isn't owned by the station or the arena, and the proximity to a busy station in rush hour would make a 7 in the morning exercise extremely difficult to keep secret. 13. The theory has far too many potential failure points. You have to rely on numerous people doing the right thing at the right time, sticking to their story, not being caught out by members of the public or the press, not being suspected by their own friends and family, and keeping this lie going for literally the rest of their life. 14. How would normal people keep this lie up forever? Parents would have to lie to their relatives, friends, kids, friends, teachers, etc. You couldn't come back in case of illness or anything. You would be under constant worry of being found out. What happens in the case of a divorce or custody over children or something like that? Furthermore, how would you actually recruit? What if people said no? What if they changed their minds? What if the faces of the dead were shown across the world? How would you hide or start a new fake life with this? Isn't this a rather big decision for 12 and 14-year-olds to be making? What parent would agree to send their 12-year-old child away to another part of the world, never to be able to see them again? 15. Why have none of those involved shown any wealth or seeming reward for participating? Why have several of the injured complained of struggling financially? 16. How much exactly would it cost to carry this out? To relocate people, to buy people new houses, to buy people silence? Wouldn't it just be simpler and easier to just set off a bomb and achieve exactly the same results? 17. If people are lying about injuries, relationships, etc., why has nobody come forward, particularly from a school? As I said, if a girl at my school only had a finger missing, I'd know about it. And you'd be loads of people all over the place saying this is bullshit. 18. The idea that no one would listen and whistleblowers would be ignored is stupid. Greg Hallett claimed with no evidence that the Queen was dead and that he, an Australian, was the new king of the UK. Hundreds of thousands of people saw this and took it seriously. 19. Richard provides absolutely no evidence of involvement by intelligence agencies of any kind. He shows no involvement of any other country or any public or private organisation. He shows absolutely no material evidence of a plot. He doesn't show any documents. He doesn't show any statements from those involved in planning. He provides no clear motivation for the alleged conspiracy. 20. He's incorrect about the BBC. They hadn't heard of Richard until Martin Hibbert approached him. They aren't out to silence him. This is what's so stupid, right? Okay. On the night of the Panorama programme, he texted me and said, well, this is ridiculous. And I said, yeah, it is a bit of a hatchet job. But to be honest, Richard, I think you're wrong. And he said, what about the Nick Bickerstaff thing? So I had a conversation and said exactly what I said tonight. Perhaps he's reaching for his car keys. And Richard was really cross with me, not because I'd been on the Panorama, but because I didn't believe his theory. And this is the thing, right? Okay. I said at the time, if you just apologize, just say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be horrible. I was genuinely involved in an investigation to find the truth. Then he'd probably have got away with it. I don't think he would have been sued. But he decided not only to ignore that advice, but to double down and then double down again.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have heard the not the Panorama thing, like you say, but like the Disaster Trolls one, and with the Marina Spring on the podcast version.
If,
it's not a good look.
No, he's not being persecuted because he exposed the truth, right? He's being persecuted because he acted in a shady manner. Now, I still think he had the best of intentions. But
sure.
He doxed people. He filmed people without their knowledge. He's got flimsy evidence. He's basically accusing people of really, really despicable things with not a lot to back it up. That's why people are cross with him. And 21, if they actually wanted to destroy Richard, they could go much harder for his Joe Cox thing. Joe Cox was an MP. Richard thinks that Joe Cox isn't really dead. And his evidence for this is that her husband looked too happy at her funeral.
Wow. Okay.
They could have brought that up. They could have brought his stuff up about Madeleine McCann. They could have even basically his COVID stuff recently. He said that don't take the vaccine because he's got nanobots in it. And when he showed the nanobots, it's like, well, it's not nanobots. It's dirt on the slide because he's not cleaned his slide. That he's looked at the microscope through. Also, he supports German new medicine, which is the principle that you think yourself ill. And the only way that you'll ever catch cancer is if you're injected by a Jew.
Uh-huh.
And he's also good friends with Holocaust denier Nick Kollerstrom. So if they wanted to destroy Richard, there are numerous other things that they could do. But I think we can fairly safely say two things. One, we did what Richard says that nobody's done, which is actually go over the evidence and give it a fair go. And two, I think we've annihilated his evidence.
Yeah, I think so. I've also probably died slightly because there's it's been a hard one because I thought I'd be annoyed, but
it's not been an easy one.
Yeah, a lot of people tonight have been spoken about in the past tense, and they just went to a gig. They just went to a gig and they didn't come back, and that sucks.
Yeah,
and they've become a playing card or a punching bag or a a tool of the New World Order. But in reality, they're just people who just went to a gig and didn't come back. And that fucking sucks.
This is the thing. And it's that closeness. And one of the reasons that I immediately sort of went, this is bullshit, Richard, is because the firm that I work for, somebody who works in, not the office that I work in, but our York office, she's one of the people that died. And I know loads of people that knew her. Her relatives have come into the office bawling their eyes out. So she's either lying to them or these are fabulous actors or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, this is bollocks, isn't it? Another friend of ours, his mate was actually a security guard in the event on the night. And he says that he's had to struggle both with post-traumatic stress disorder from seeing dead bodies, dead children, and then also constantly being harassed on the internet by people who are telling him that it's fake.
And that he's part of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That he's part of it. Yeah. Yeah. That is the worst part.
And you know what? Here's the silly thing, right? Okay. Is, all the questions that Richard asked, we asked them as well, because we had to ask them in order to get to the bottom of it. We haven't upset anybody. We didn't set up a camera in anybody's front yard, and we found out more information than Richard. So this is the thing. I think people just need to be careful about these things. Remember, there's real people involved, and think about it. What you want to achieve, you can find these things out without hurting people.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's been a hard one today.
That was a hard one. But thank you for sticking with us, Joel.
And that concludes the series. Thank you for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy, the Manchester Arena Bombing on Trial series.